Hello and good evening. I am Audrey Zunkel DeCourcy, President of the League of Women Voters of Portland. I'm pleased to welcome you to our community education panel on empowering voters and defending democracy. For many of you, these are familiar words from the League's initiative since 2024. Yet never have those four words resonated with such urgency. Empowering voters, defending democracy. The federal government is taking actions that threaten our democratic institutions and rip away basic civil rights. Our Constitution, the rule of law, and our right to free and fair elections all are under attack. Tonight, we'll hear from leaders at the federal, state, and local levels who are helping preserve and enhance our democratic institutions and protecting the civil and voting rights of all citizens. Now, let me emphasize at this point that the League is a nonpartisan organization. We do not support or oppose any party or candidate. We do engage in civil discourse about political issues from a nonpartisan lens, knowing that these critical civil and voting rights issues affect all of us. Nonpartisan does not mean not political, and it does not mean neutral. The League believes that democracy is best protected when voters are informed and engaged, and not just at election seasons. For this reason, we present programs like this to connect you directly with leaders at the forefront of current events. Now, links to the recordings of this panel will be posted on our website by next week, LWVPDX.org. So please share the video or podcast with your friends, neighbors, colleagues, and social networks. I want to give a special shout out to our sister leagues in Union County and Lane County and across the state who are hosting live viewing parties to join us tonight. Thank you. Our moderator tonight is a board member of the League of Women Voters of Portland, Linda Jackson. And I turn the program over to you now, Linda.
Okay, thank you, Audrey. And good evening, everyone. We are so glad you are here. We are honored to have with us an outstanding panel of leaders, each of whom is fighting to protect our voting rights and our democracy itself through legislative lobbying, the legal system, and the ballot box. We are deeply grateful for our speakers joining us tonight to bring us insight into the challenges they face and envision, the victories they have won and have still to win, and what we can do to support them. I will be introducing each speaker before they speak. Each of our speakers will speak for about 10 minutes. We invite you to post questions in the Zoom chat at any time during the program. And if your question is for a particular speaker, please note that in the chat. After we've heard from all three speakers, we will ask as many of your questions as time allows. Finally, if you want to know more about us at the League, check us out online at our website, and we have that posted in the chat, LWVPDX.org. So let's hear from our speakers now. It's my pleasure to introduce our first panelist. Jessica Jones-Caporell is the Director of Government Affairs for the League of Women Voters of the United States. Jessica manages relationships and strategic planning for federal legislation and lobbying that benefits the programs and policies of the League. Additionally, she advises and assists with aligning advocacy and legislative priorities at all levels of the organization. Jessica builds strategic campaigns to impact areas of public policy, to generate public support for relevant issues, to lobby for policy changes, and to maintain current knowledge of government changes and actions. She will discuss the National League's efforts to defend democracy at the federal legislative level while empowering voters to stand up and act. Welcome, Jessica.
Thank you so much, Linda. Hi, everyone. Good evening. It is a little bit later where I am than it is where you are. And I am truly sorry if you hear a loud 5-year-old in the background who is trying to go to sleep. But it's truly an honor to be here with you today as part of this community education series Thank you for being here, for caring about your community, and for showing up for our democracy at a time when your voice genuinely matters. The League's mission is simple, but it's profound: to empower voters and defend democracy. And it's a mission we've carried forward for more than a century. But right now, that mission is not abstract, it is urgent. The last few years, 2024, 2025, have been a stress test for American democracy. We're witnessing coordinated efforts across the country to restrict voting access, to nationalize election administration, to consolidate power, and to undermine public trust in our elections. And the League is responding on every front, federally, locally, in the courts, and in communities, because democracy does not defend itself. People do. And I'm proud to say that over the past year, more than 1 million League members and supporters have stepped forward to meet this moment. Now, I work at the federal level with Congress, with the administration, and anyone else who will listen to us. So at the federal level, the League is working tirelessly to oppose legislation that would make it harder for eligible Americans to register and cast a ballot. And this includes fighting against bills like the SAVE Act and the Save America Act, which you may have heard about recently. These proposals claim to be about election integrity, but in practice, they create new barriers for millions of eligible voters, women who have changed their names, rural voters, voters of color, and anyone without easy access to documentary proof of citizenship. We are meeting at the League directly with members of Congress, submitting formal letters and testimony, coordinating coalition strategy, and equipping state and local leagues to engage with their own delegations. And the scale of our engagement has been remarkable. In just the past year, we've sent over 185,000 letters and faxes to Capitol Hill. Over 222,000 advocacy actions have been taken by leagues, and over 106,000 actions have been taken by individual supporters. We're also pushing back against efforts to federalize or nationalize elections in ways that undermine states' constitutional authority and disrupt trusted local election administration. Our message to Congress is clear: protect voters, strengthen access, do not weaponize election administration for partisan gain. There are many angles that the League can be fighting from to save our democracy. And we know it's about more than just protecting the freedom to vote, because we know that policy issues like immigration, healthcare, economic justice, climate change, and access to reproductive rights are important too. And in fact, we know that when people lose their rights or their access, it further limits the ways in which they can fully participate in our democracy. And that's why we've been working to leverage our grassroots-derived policy positions to fight back and make a connection back to our democracy with every issue that we talk about. Last summer, during the fight to oppose the One Big Beautiful Bill that made drastic cuts to Medicaid programs across the country and severely cut SNAP benefits to Americans that needed assistance, the League fought back, drawing a connection to the responsibilities of Congress to take care of the basic human needs of the American people, back to their constitutional responsibility to protect the most vulnerable populations of our country and their constituents. We've continued standing in our principles and our positions as we work to counter the overreach of federal immigration forces in cities around the country. We've called on Congress to provide oversight, and we've been mobilizing people power to demand accountability. Whether it's in the streets, the halls of Congress, or standing together with our partners, the League is deeply committed to protecting those in the country who are on the path to achieving the American dream. We're also working to stand strong and defend the rights and individual liberties of those citizens who are being injured, detained, and in some places, fatally wounded. We're fighting these battles at the state and local levels too, and by arming our leagues with resources and tools to fight back at the state and local levels. You know, my team, advocacy team at the national office, we work at the federal level, but we also work to connect our work to our state and local leagues and help them prepare for their own legislative sessions by tracking legislation, analyzing trends, and building policy assessments to prepare our leagues to support and oppose legislation that fits within our priorities and positions. We know that good legislation and bad legislation starts at the local and state level. and eventually it will rise to the federal level. So we're working to stop it or foster it at the state and local level as well. We've made investments in our state leagues to help them build out their advocacy bench and train strong volunteers that are able to speak on multiple issues at hearings in state capitals. These advocacy warriors are not only helping us at the state level, but at the federal level as well, as they continue to build relationships with lawmakers, grow the league's presence in state houses around the country, and spread awareness about the policy issues that voters care about and want to turn out for. We're also working to respond as necessary to ongoing policy issues by developing a series of advocacy toolkits that our leagues can use. And this includes templates, messaging guidance, and background materials to support action on various pressing advocacy issues. They cover everything from documentary proof of citizenship to immigration enforcement, reproductive rights, and more. Now, I am not a lawyer, but I work really closely with a brilliant team that is defending democracy in the courts. Advocacy alone is not enough in this moment, and that's why litigation remains a core part of the league's work. We are challenging unlawful voter roll purges, massive federal data consolidation efforts that violate privacy and due process, and executive actions that overstep constitutional authority, including in cases involving birthright citizenship and documentary proof of citizenship. And the impact has been significant. Over the past year, the league was active in 94 cases across the country. Our work has helped to protect the rights of over 11 million voters. In one major case, we successfully blocked an executive order that would have required documentary proof of citizenship for the federal voter registration form, preventing new barriers from taking effect nationwide. We also engaged through amicus briefs and coalition litigation to defend constitutional protections and support partners on the front lines. Because when laws or executive actions violate constitutional rights, the courts must serve as a guardrail. But democracy is not only defended only in Washington or in a courtroom, and that's why the league is so dedicated to building a people-powered network to stand up for it. It is defended in communities, in living rooms, in conversations, in civic participation. And that's why our Unite and Rise initiative is so important. Through this effort, we're mobilizing and engaging 8.5 million voters ahead of the 2026 midterms. This is one of the most ambitious civic engagement efforts in modern history, grounded in civic education, public engagement, coalition building, and nonviolent action. And during the last election cycle alone, we've made 21 million voter contacts. We've held 600 plus voter registration drives on one day. That's National Voter Registration Day. And thanks to all of you all who have been part of those. And we've registered 482,000 voters nationwide, give or take. Those are not just numbers. Those are neighbors. Those are first-time voters. Those are young people. And those are people whose voices matter and whose participation shapes our future. In a moment flooded with misinformation and fear, trusted, nonpartisan voter education is one of the most powerful tools that we have, and Vote for 11 is at the center of that effort. Our online voter information platform continues to reach millions of people with the accurate, accessible information they need, and it's available in both English and Spanish. Vote for 11 is helping voters cut through the noise and make informed decisions based on facts, not fear, and not misinformation. Now, I like to leave everyone with a call to action. So what can you do? How can each of us help defend democracy? And I've got maybe 4 things. First, stay informed through trusted resources like Vote for 11. Second, engage with your members of Congress. When lawmakers hear from constituents, our federal advocacy grows stronger. Third, participate in league advocacy action alerts and opportunities. You can find them online anytime at LWV.org. And finally, invite others into the work. Share information, share opportunities, share your commitment, because our democracy is strongest when participation is broad. Let me end with this. The challenges facing our democracy are real, but so is the power of people who choose to show up. People like you. People like me, people like our neighbors, communities like this one, a movement like the League of Women Voters that has been fighting for representation, inclusion, and justice for more than 100 years and is not stopping now. Democracy is not something we inherit. It is something we build, something we protect, and something we renew generation by generation. And in this moment, your engagement, your advocacy, and your voice matter more than ever. Thank you for being part of this work. Thank you for standing with the League, and thank you for choosing to defend democracy, because it truly cannot defend itself without you. I look forward to hearing from the other panelists, and I look forward to answering your questions tonight. And Linda, I'll hand it back over to you.
Okay, thank you so much, Jessica. And thank you, Jessica, for your work at the League of Women Voters at the national level to protect our vote and to defend our democracy. Now, it is my honor to welcome our next speaker. He has a long and deep connection with Oregon, having attended Tigard High School, Western Oregon University, and Willamette University Law School, and serving 9 years in the Oregon legislature, culminating as Speaker of the House. As Attorney General, he has been focused on upholding Oregon's values and the rule of law. Since the start of his tenure in January 2025, his office has sued the federal government more than 50 times over issues impacting the state, including limitations in SNAP eligibility, new tariffs, cuts to grant funding, restrictions on gender-affirming care, voting restrictions, ending birthright citizenship, and blocking the deployment of the National Guard to Portland. Our second speaker will talk about his office's ongoing work to protect the vote and defend democracy in Oregon. Welcome, Attorney General Dan Rayfield.
Well, thank you, Linda. Thank you, everybody, for organizing this and allowing me to be here. Wonderful to be able to talk with you a little bit about some of the work that we've been doing over the past year, the work that we're going to continue doing for the entire time that we're in office, I think for the entire existence of the Oregon Department of Justice. And I think the reason I say that very quickly at the very top, and I appreciated Linda at the very top where we were talking a little bit about how the League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization, but it doesn't mean that you aren't political in the way that we go about our work. Upholding the rule of law and supporting the institutions of a democracy, to me, is not a partisan issue at all. And that's the way that we as the Oregon Department of Justice have approached these issues. And a lot of that and the way we think about this is rooted in some of the ways that I was raised when I grew up. I grew up in some of you may know this story because I talk about it a lot, but it really shaped how I view the world. I grew up in a very divided household. My mother was incredibly progressive. She's still a Green Party member, and she would take me to protest as a kid, and she would go get arrested at the Nevada nuclear test site protesting nuclear weapons. And when I would ask her, why are you getting arrested, which is confusing for a kid, but when you ask her, why are you getting arrested for this, she would tell me, I believe having less nuclear weapons in our world makes us safer. Now, my dad, on the other hand, was a Republican. And on the other side, he was a colonel in the Air Force Reserves and would tell me that he believed we needed nuclear weapons to keep our world safe. Really talking about this fundamental issue of values where they both wanted the world safe, but they were going about it in very different ways. I believe the way that we're acting in this moment is incredibly a nonpartisan way to uphold the rule of law, where we're focused on an outcome. And you can be a president, an incredibly powerful person, right? And you may want to have an outcome that you want to get to, but you have to do it in the appropriate way. And that may be through Congress. You have Congress in its role, right? When it oversteps and steps onto the Constitution and exceeds their scope and powers as given to them, there needs to be a check and balance in the system. And the Oregon Department of Justice is the place right now here in Oregon where we have been able to do that agnostically through a very simple analysis. And the way that we're evaluating the world right now is when something happens back east in Washington, D.C., and the president makes a decision, or Congress or whomever makes a decision to move forward in the administration, we ask ourselves, are Oregonians being harmed? If they are being harmed, we ask, is there an unlawful act or an unconstitutional act? Again, a very sterile analysis of how we move forward. If the answers to both of those questions are yes, and the state has standing, we will move forward to file a lawsuit. And that's why up top, I think it was mentioned that we have more than 55 lawsuits currently filed here in Oregon. One of the things that was very important to me when I first came into office as well is that Oregon wasn't just a, hands up, us too state, right? A Me Too state where we were just following the lead of other states. I think, as was mentioned, when we're sitting here and we're protecting the institutions of a democracy, I believe the state of Oregon should lead on those issues and not take a back seat. And that is a responsibility that I think we have in this moment in time. And so one of the very early on things that we did to be able to do this was to be able to set up a brand new team of lawyers and staff that were prepared day in and day out to stand up for Oregon's values and lead on various cases. I want to talk a little bit about what that looks like, the partnership with the other states, and how the formation of this new team has allowed us to be responsive and actually succeed in court, get wins for these institutions of democracy. So the first thing that we talk about is you've seen the breadth of cases that are out there right now against the federal government. And this is an unprecedented time where you have an administration that's pushing the bounds and stress testing our democracy on so many different fronts. If you had said, Oregon alone, can you take on all of these battles? The answer would have absolutely been no. What it required was cooperation from all of the other Democratic attorneys general working together to be prepared so that we can use our resources as strategically as possible to make sure that we were drawing the starkest line in the sand that we possibly could with respect to some incredibly important issues that we were facing. So one of the things very early on was birthright citizenship. So as we walked through a presidential election cycle, we knew that President Trump, that was an area that he wanted to make a statement. And we knew that he was going to do that very early on in his tenure. So we had draft lawsuits of different research done prior to inauguration. And when he signed his first executive order, within 24 hours, the state of Oregon, along with Washington and Minnesota, had a case filed in Washington. And within 48 hours, we got the first ruling in any of the cases against Trump, again, effectively upholding what was more than 100 years of interpretation of our Constitution and this president's attempt to reread the Constitution with fancy lawyering. So very successful at the very front end. But the reason that we were successful there, again, is this collaboration and cooperation amongst all of the Democratic attorneys general to sit there and say, hey, this is a baseline rule of law. And we're going to uphold that and be agnostic when it comes to politics on this issue. The second case that I would just highlight for folks is we think is in Oregon that we were living and watching go on was the tariffs case. And at the time the tariffs case was going on, or not the tariffs case, at the time when the president was starting to implement these chaotic tariffs up and down, depending on the day, depending on his mood, what he read on Twitter, you just never knew. That was creating a chaotic business environment. It was a chaotic environment for us as consumers. And in our office, we were traveling around the state, holding forums and listening to individuals about the impacts of what was going on in the federal what I would say sphere of decisions that were being made. And you remember early on in the tenure, that was a lot, from DOGE to funding withholding to tariffs, you name it. A lot of things were being attacked at that moment. One thing came loud and clear here in Oregon is that we were a very export-heavy state. We had incredible relationships with Canada and our nursery industries. We have local pharmacies that are reliant upon fixed reimbursement rates that can't change when the cost of their products change. We had a bra manufacturer in Eugene. I remember at one of our forums talking about component manufacturing parts that are just not made in the United States, that are made overseas, that were being impacted, which impacts the bottom line and jobs. You had the food industry was being impacted because there are certain foods that just cannot grow in the United States. One of those was Ranger chocolates up in Portland, where they had fixed price contracts to deliver goods and services. However, in the middle of that, you then have this massive increase of the products that you need to be able to make chocolate. And, spoiler alert, turns out cacao does not grow in Oregon or in the United States, right? So this impacts how we're doing it. So what was our role and responsibility to step into this? And this was one of the areas that, frankly, had not really been researched as much by the attorneys general. But because of the team that we stood up here in Oregon, we were able to lead that case on behalf of all of the states and get that filed. And it was the first case that wound its way all the way to the United States Supreme Court. And this was just a couple of weeks ago, where we got the first ruling on the merits of any lawsuit from the Supreme Court in this Trump era. Incredible, huge win. Again, a lot of these wins and victories are coming from judges appointed by Trump himself. So again, some of our institutions that are being stressed are holding up. Now, full transparency, does that mean that I don't think that the courts are being pressured? Absolutely, I do. Does that mean that I agree with every decision that the courts are making right now? Absolutely not. But you are seeing some of these areas where we are being stress tested being upheld in court. So that was a wonderful sign. And again, you should be proud to be an Oregonian, to be proud of having public servants that are willing to stand up day in and day out on big cases that are impacting all of our businesses and us as consumers. Huge win there. And again, all the credit to the amazing lawyers and staff that we have at the Oregon Department of Justice. The other case that really kind of took the news for a lot of us, right, is this normalization of the use of military on the streets of our cities in America. And this was another thing that we saw very personally in Portland, and felt it very acutely when you had the president trying to mobilize the National Guard to deploy on the streets of Portland. Again, different strategies in different states. California, it started there. It went into Washington, D.C. You had Tennessee. They were threatening to do it in Illinois, but the orders came next for Portland. One of the things that we wanted to do, again, was be very aggressive and took a little bit of a different legal tact than some of the other states did. Our job and what I had instructed folks is I wanted to be in court before the National Guard ever hit the streets in Oregon. And we were able, within 12 hours of an order, to be in court because we know that in a courtroom, real facts can be discussed. It isn't the drivel that you see on social media because anyone can say anything on there. What we needed to have was real facts under oath in front of a neutral to be able to determine whether the president had or had not exceeded his authority to mobilize and federalize the National Guard here in Oregon. And as all of us know on here, that was an incredibly quick, intense period of time during a month-long period where we ended up being successful all the way through this court. And most recently, the federal government again actually backed out and pulled their appeal in the Ninth Circuit Court. Again, another success that we had in there. But again, a lot of these things are not possible if you don't have the systems in place that are ready to respond. And this is one of the things that I think about, right now as we have this ever-changing political landscape and the need to evolve, whether that's in our voting systems and making sure that we're defending those, or in our the funding spaces or the rights and responsibilities that Congress has. How are we evolving in these different institutions? For us at the Oregon Department of Justice, it was evolving in how do we communicate with people, setting up a federal oversight cabinet so we can be better in touch with communities. It was about making sure we had a unit so we could lead and be a part of a much broader mission to make sure that the rule of law is being upheld. It's also being very open and honest about some of the realities that we're seeing and making sure we're having what I would consider some untraditional relationships where we're trying to facilitate looking various outcomes through working together. Another wonderful example of that, because that was a lot of politicians speak fancy words that didn't mean a lot in the moment. But to give you an example of what that means, the ACLU had standing to file a court case about the excessive force that was going on at our Portland ICE facility, something that we had seen in our National Guard trails, something that we had actually created a portal to gather complaints. So we were able to creatively use that information and then be in court with the ACLU with filings and arguing on behalf of that case just this week, using the information that we gathered through these other alternative processes. So we're trying to be creative, meet the moment in time to make the biggest impact that we possibly can. Again, doing it agnostic agnostically, but supporting the institutions of our governments, our democracy, and making sure that it doesn't matter what branch of government you're in, that you're staying in your lane for those reasons. So I'm probably way over 10 minutes, Linda, and I apologize for that. But and by the way, this was mentioned, we're not supposed to respond to all of the comments in the chat. Linda, she rules a real tight ship here, and she told me, "Don't you dare." And so I'm going to be respectful, and I won't respond because they will be summarized later.
Right. Thank you so much, Dan. You're absolutely right. We'll be taking the questions out of chat and feeding them to you. We are so glad to hear your insights from the state level of fighting here for the state of Oregon. Our third speaker is Jalen Suppa, a member of the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs and co-founder of the Tribal Democracy Project, dedicated to addressing Native voter disenfranchisement and defending tribal sovereignty through community empowerment. The Tribal Democracy Project works to increase Native voter turnout, fight gerrymandering, and encourage Native candidates to run for office. Looking forward to a future where more Native leaders hold office, not just on tribal councils, but on school boards, county commissions, city councils, and the state legislature. Jalen will look at the vital roles played by civic engagement and voter empowerment at the community level. Welcome, Jalen.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the invitation. Like Linda said, my name is Jalen Suppa. I'm a member of the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs, and we formed Tribal Democracy Project in 2023, so we're fairly new. However, we do have a ton of experience in electoral politics and civic engagement in tribal communities and in rural Oregon. The reason that we came to become an organization actually starts prior to our foundation. Both myself and Brian Smith, who is the co-founder and co-director along with me, worked on a campaign where I was actually running for school board at the time and was able to recruit there was about 5 of us that were running. I was the first one, and then I gathered folks and was like, hey, we need more representation. And in our area, our school makeup was roughly 30% Native, 30% Latinx, and 29% white with 1% as other. And our board didn't reflect that. And so that's really what I ran on the equitable representation of the student population and the families that that the board serves. And so I was able to get 4 other amazing women to join me. And we ran a really successful campaign. It really helped us to develop a field program that we now utilize pretty much every year or every time there's an election through really community grassroots organizing. And unfortunately, I didn't win. I lost by 55 votes. However, I will say I took it as a win because what happened in that election is we turned out almost 3 times the amount that has ever showed up for Warm Springs community. And that was huge for us because we had a lot of people that aren't engaged in the system. They're not voting, they're not engaged. And so that really leads me to our theory of change is if we can educate our people on what the importance is of voting and understand the which I will say I am not I don't want to say I'm not political, but I've never saw myself in a leadership position. And so I think for me to run was it was an amazing experience. It was tough. I've never been on a campaign before, but where I was the candidate. And so it was really tough. I would also say that it taught me a lot. It taught me a lot, and I got to hear the different stories from people of why they didn't vote. We heard a lot of people telling us why they didn't vote, and that goes back to the history of this nation. And so when we think about engaging people in tribal communities, we have to understand that there has been a lot of harm that has been done. And so, in order for them to trust the system and to trust people, there has to be relationship building. And so, our theory of change is really around providing the civic engagement and education for our community members to understand what is on the ballot, who is on the ballot, and where to get that information. And a lot of the times, there is a lot of barriers for people to vote, whether it's IDs, accepting IDs. We do have tribal identification, but sometimes people don't accept that, even though it's a federal form of identification. And then we have all of our, in Warm Springs specifically, we all receive our ballots in our PO boxes, which can make it really difficult because you have several members in several households, sometimes using one PO box. Then oftentimes they're like, we lost our ballot. And so there's a lot of, and folks live rural. And so I grew up in the northern part of the reservation, which is called Simnasho, and I have to drive about 15 to 20 minutes just to the post office to get our mail. And so we're often not checking mail every single day. And if somebody else in another household checks our mail and might take our ballot home, that creates a lot of barriers for us to vote. And so really teaching our community on how to communicate with one another, let them know elections are coming, because oftentimes they don't know elections are coming. There's not a lot of resources and information that is getting put into tribal communities. And I think for me, that's where I really want to drive home tonight, is that there is a lot of benefit to working with tribal nations and tribal communities in defending our democracy. There is a lot of ways that we can show up. We have a very high, I can't remember the percentage, but we have a really high percentage. So for example, if I was to run for school board this upcoming election, if just Warm Springs members only showed up to vote for me, I would win by a huge number, but we don't show up to vote. So therefore, we aren't getting folks elected in especially school board. That is where my expertise is school boards. And so knowing that, that means that there's an opportunity for a lot of other places where we could be encouraging people to vote and educate them. And so really our theory of change is really around education and engagement. And so some of the things that we are working on right now is, of course, relationship building across the state, both with Native and non-Native groups and organizations. And then we also are involved with a tri-state relationship with Native Vote Washington, and then there's an Idaho group who focuses on Native communities in Idaho, and so really trying to work at a more broader context of, yes, we have Oregon, but how do we then support each other more broadly? We provide get out the vote education, support, and connections to resources for tribal communities. Again, like I said, there's not a lot of resources and not a lot of work that happens in tribal communities to get the Native vote out. And so that's been one of our focuses. And so not only getting Native vote out, but also encouraging and empowering tribal folks to run for office. And that is not something that we have the ability to do. Well, I shouldn't say the ability to do. We have the ability to do that, and that's what we're doing, but there hasn't been a focus on that. And so we are prioritizing that. I am launching a tribal civics engagement learning community, which actually starts tomorrow night. And I'm really excited. This is 2 years in the making, where I'm really going to do everything that I just specifically talked about. I'm going to be walking members and their descendants through the Confederate Tribes of Warm Springs Treaty of 1855 to examine our Constitution, our bylaws, and the roles and responsibilities of our legislative committees and boards. And then we're also going to look at the intersections between the local and state and federal level and how we can work together with all of the different levels coming together and where that makes most sense. And tribal nations, they have their own government. And so, we are working on housing, transportation, food insecurity, education, all the different things, just like the US government is. And so we are a nation within a nation. And so my goal is to be able to educate my people on what does it look like to be a tribal government, and then where the intersects and the partnerships that can occur with the U.S. government, and how do we bring those together so that we can support one another. And then the last thing that we're working on is in Deschutes County right now. We are working on, there was a gerrymander district map that was put on the ballot. And so we're going to be working on education efforts around the electoral reform with organizations like, so the Deschutes League of Women Voters is involved in that. We have Common Cause Oregon, More Equitable Democracy, and Sightline Institute. And we are partnering with the local community, and we formed the Deschutes Defend Our Democracy Coalition to oppose the gerrymandering and also introduce proportional representation as the best model for elections for commissioners. And so, and the reason why Deschutes County is important to me and to tribal nations is that in Deschutes County, in Bend, if people don't know where Deschutes County is, it's in Bend. The Confederate Tribes of Warm Springs has ceded territories that run over Bend all the way to Sun River. And then you have to look at the Burns Paiute tribe, who also has ceded territories that run into the Deschutes County area. And then the Klamath tribes also have ceded lands that run into the Deschutes County. And so really trying to push this, the fact that tribal nations have tribal sovereignty and therefore they should be involved in consultation when it comes to their ceded territories, which overlap with what's the word I'm looking for? County line, the county line of the district. And so again, our focus is tribal sovereignty, and so supporting and empowering those tribal nations to get involved to be able to support the community. And I think the last thing I'll leave you with, because I had a lot more to say, but I want to make sure we get time to questions, is just being able to plant the seed to really help people understand how, if working together with tribal nations, that can really bring strong partnerships and advocacy for all people through our state and through our country. And so I really want you to consider how tribal nations play a role in defending our democracy and how we can partner together for the long-term success and I think just the health of our nation. So thank you so much for inviting me tonight. I appreciate being able to have this space to talk, and I look forward to the questions that people have.
Okay. Oh, thank you, Jalen. Your work is informative, but your work is inspiring. And so thank you so much. As a reminder to our audience, if you have questions for the speakers, please put them in the chat. We'll get to as many as possible. So let's get started with our first question. It will be for Jessica. We appear to have an autocratic leader, democratically elected. Who is the League of Women Voters US partnering with to defend democracy?
That's a great question. We have a number of different partners. I can tell you that we work with civil rights organizations like the NAACP. We work with organizations like the Leadership Conference. We also partner with the American Civil Liberties Union, ACLU, Southern Poverty Law Center, Southern Coalition for Social Justice. We work with Common Cause. It depends on the issue, but we have a number of different partners that we work with. There's a lot of different angles and interest from different organizations, and the league is often seen as a strong partner ourselves, whether it's on advocacy or litigation, and even on our voter engagement work. So those are a couple of examples of partners that we work with. But we're always looking for new partnerships. So if you know of any other organizations that would like to partner, we're open to it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Our second question is for Attorney General Rayfield. Could you, this is technical, define the term standing and talk about arguments on the merits? And then share with us what can we do to help and support your work?
All right. So we got three questions there. I think maybe we'll start off with standing. And this is just a legal concept that there are certain cases. Well, in each case, someone has to have standing to be able to bring the lawsuit. So it's a legal idea. And I think we can probably simplify it. In certain cases, right, I couldn't bring a case on behalf of my neighbor because of, you say, their window got broken because of a faulty, a rock was thrown in it by, someone, right? I couldn't bring that lawsuit on behalf of my neighbor. I would not have standing because I was not the party to be able to bring that. So it's kind of a legal concept. My neighbor is the one that would need to bring that. There are a lot of cases right now where you say to yourself, okay, why can't we do more? And if we were to say, for instance, if I saw from the Oregon Department of Justice, if I saw an isolated incident of excessive force, say by, and these are things going on right now, say an ICE agent, we have confirmed things under oath where we're seeing excessive force, would I be able to bring a certain action against the government on behalf of that individual? No, that's not my role in the institutions that we have. That individual would have a 1983 claim on their own behalf to then enforce their own rights. They would have standing. So in certain cases, we're trying to find ways where we can add value when we don't naturally have standing. And the shorthand of this is we just be kicked out of the courtroom. And you heard Jessica talk a little bit about this, where it's amicus briefs. That's one way where we don't have standing, but we can come into the courtroom and argue on behalf of various things. So a good example of that would be the tariffs case that was filed. Now, Congress and a lot of those members of Congress didn't have standing to argue in that case. They weren't the ones necessarily being impacted, but we as states, right, we actually were paying for tariffs. The bill for tariffs actually is paid by United States citizens or businesses. And so we as a state, as you were writing checks to our U.S. government, like taxes, to pay for these things. And so that's why we had standing, because we were being harmed to be in court. So that's one way to think about that. And again, we could talk so much more about it, but I know we've only got so much time tonight. The other side of that, so thanks for bearing with me on a very in detailed legal question. Hopefully I'm translating and it's understandable. The other part is on the merits. And so this is an interesting thing where we've seen very early on in some of these cases where you'll have a temporary restraining order. Okay. And I think a lot of people hear that and they think, boy, is this in, a civil domestic case? No, a temporary restraining order is something that just pauses the action, right? We're able to tell, in our case, right? So the federal government is withholding something or doing something. We get a temporary restraining order. It's immediate relief. It's temporary to stop what's going on. That's just a shorthand way to explain it. Later on, when you can have a little bit more of a full process, you get to a preliminary injunction. Again, it's preliminary. It's a little bit more long-term than a temporary restraining order. And all of these things are to preserve, for lack of a better word, the status quo before you can have kind of that full trial, before you can really get into the merits of the case and hear the back and forth, so a judge or a jury, as the case may be, can make an informed decision about what's right under the law moving forward. And so those types of things are what we would kind of say not on the merits, that temporary restraining order, the preliminary injunction. Some of the things that have gone up to the United States Supreme Court, where people will talk about a universal injunction, something that would apply to all 50 states. And there's philosophies about what is the appropriate mechanism in our judiciary and the tools of the courts when we're in the middle of a dispute. So you've heard some of those things. Those cases are not rulings on the merit. When we got into the tariffs case, that was one where we went through the early injunctive relief stages. We got into an actual back and forth about what the case was, and a judge made a final order in that, which eventually was appealed up and went through the Supreme Court. The National Guard case went through a temporary restraining order and then eventually wound up through a trial where we were successful at trial. So again, that's when I say that, it's the first ruling on the merits of any significant case. That was a ruling on the merits that then eventually got upheld by the United States Supreme Court. So that was long. And then I think the other component of that is, how can we help? How can we be supportive? And I think the one thing to remember, we all have a unique set of tools at our disposal. Whether you're the state legislature, you have a unique set of tools at your disposal. As an attorney general, I have a unique set of tools. I don't have the legislative tools, right? As a governor, and then we as citizens have our own unique set of tools, and every single one of those have to be used in a moment like this. So that one individual with the case that has a civil rights case, the civil rights case, there's not a criminal case, but there's a civil case. that individual needs to pursue their civil rights case, right? It takes us as organizations coming together like the league does to provide context and value, bringing people together, because there is absolutely power in numbers. And politicians and people respond when they hear from volume, and when they hear from numbers. And I also believe that they will respond when they get adverse court rulings, whether that is a monetary ruling by an individual that has been harmed, or whether it is by us as a state. One of the number one things that will cause a deterrent for down the road, say on given tariffs case, is when a judge starts to order that you have to repay those unlawful tariffs. These are the type of things that go on that really start to change behavior. And then ultimately, having conversations with our friends, doing it in our family, with our neighbors in a way that is not judgmental, but we're just having neutral conversations about outcomes and what we think is best for our community and a vision, I think are really important conversations that we also have to have. I think right now in a moment in time, so often we talk about the things we don't like and the things that we are against, that we need to talk about what we're for and what we're moving towards. And I think that those are really equally important conversations that need to occur as well amongst ourselves.
Hey, thank you so much. That leads us in a way to this next one is for you, Jalen. I think the questioner or the commenter in the chat spoke for many of us. Thanks for the important work you're doing to engage the tribal nations in your county. Is there something that the League of Women Voters in Portland, and we have a League of Women Voters for the state of Oregon, that we could do to support and advance your work?
Thank you for that question. I didn't get to talk about it a little bit in my thing. I think one of the things, of course, that can always support us is we are a new organization. So, of course, funding and resources is always big. And I think around that, I'm not just asking for money. I think one of the, I know everybody's always asking for money, but I think for tribes specifically, because there isn't resources necessarily around this, because also we get put into rural Oregon, which we all know rural Oregon isn't funded to the amount that it really needs. And so, but specifically for my reservation, for example, when we do get out the votes, we have to really put together the data ourselves, because the data that comes from the state does not help us, because like I said, everybody has PO boxes. So our mail does not go to addresses. And so we're having to kind of work backwards. And when we're getting out and where our team is on the reservation out and getting folks to register and to vote, there's a lot of legwork that happens on our end that we have to do. And that's not just for Warm Springs. I know that's true for other tribes within our state and probably the nation as well. And so really looking at resources to help us develop, not only to get resources in to do the work, but also to start creating strategies, specifically around funding strategies on how do we get more resources specifically around civic engagement to our tribal nations, so that we can start building up our civic engagement groups and folks, not only to get involved with voting, but also to then move on to become potential leaders in their communities and to run for office. And so we're looking at, I always think of the way that our tribal nations were formed, and so I think we're really babies in this work. We were given different types of, our Constitution was essentially laid out for us. And so really working on, and I think that's why the importance of the education of understanding the US government and how they intersect with tribal governments is really important, because we are really babies in this and learning how the system works and how the system impacts us. And so and with Tribal Democracy Project, we are not a large organization. We are very small. We are 2 people that are from tribal communities who are trying to do good work. And unfortunately, we don't have all the resources to do all the things that we want to do, to be able to bring on support staff. And so I would say that is one way. And then I think the other way is whether it's providing education to leaders, to bringing up the conversation of, did you talk to the tribal nation that is in your area? Are you consulting with the tribal nation? Asking those questions. If there isn't tribal folks in the room, being that the advocate on our behalf to ask those questions of, are there tribal nations that should be consulted? Should they be at the table? If they're not at the table, why aren't they here? And so asking those important questions, and then maybe connecting them and building relationship. I think that's the biggest piece I always recommend to people, is build relationships so that when you are calling in question of, are there supposed to be tribal nations here? Then you can then connect them with those people to be able to start building those bridges. Thank you.
Oh, Jalen, that was so comprehensive. Thank you. I can hear people taking notes already. Dan Rayfield, I have another 3-in-1 question for you. Same person. Why does the Trump administration want voter rolls in each state? How likely is it that the Trump administration could take away our vote by mail system? And is your office planning on taking that on?
You gotta love the complex questions. So let's just start off with values and how we're prepared. So I mentioned at the very beginning that we as Democratic Attorneys General have been prepared for day one, and we will continue to be prepared. And voting rights and the integrity, and this is really important, the integrity of our electoral systems is paramount, and we are incredibly focused on that. To give you good examples, we already have lawsuits filed protecting voter data. We have other lawsuits that we've been active as Attorneys General working for. Oregon's a part of all of them, right? And we're leading in some of these. As a backdrop, the type of preparation that we're doing right now, and maybe even talking about what we're seeing, this is an arena where, depending on how you're looking at things, we have politicians openly talking about gerrymandering, and this has been going on in Democratic and Republican states, right? Let's be honest about how things are going on right now. That is not healthy for, I believe, personally, the long-term sustainability of our democracy. We should never put citizens in a place where politicians are attempting to game the lines of our electoral bounds for the outcomes in an election. That's a real problem. So you have these types of things going on. You have grabs of information that are inappropriate. You have threats about, federalizing different elements of our electoral system. These are things that we as Attorneys General have sat down, and we're continuing to sit down pretty regularly and talk about how are we going to protect these institutions so that Americans, Oregonians, all of us have confidence that our elections will be fair and safe. And we've had, even to the extent of tabletop exercises where we are projecting or role-playing into, if we were to attack our systems, how would we do those things? Now, here's the interesting thing. The Trump administration, a lot of folks are being very open about how they want to go about these issues. So we do have a lot of hints on how things may or may not occur. I think the tough thing in these roles are to understand what is real and what's not real. And sometimes you'll hear people in our office talk about it. Is this thunder or is this lightning? And right now, it kind of doesn't matter. We all have to take it all as lightning as we prepare in the event that these things go forward. So I think as you're thinking about this, and these, a lot of these issues deeply worry me, just know that we are prepared. We will be ready, and we'll be using all of our tools to push back. And that's including our soapbox, from being in the courtroom to being there with all of you, protesting any type of unconstitutional behavior that's going to impact our elections. So know that's going on. I think in a broad scope, there are a lot of things. Am I worried about vote by mail in Oregon? One thing about the Constitution is it says, hey, if they're silent, if the federal government's silent about our elections, a lot of that stuff defers down to the states. And so right now we're in an area where the president is threatening to do executive orders trying to impact the vote by mail. And a lot of the things that he's talking about, by our analysis, would indeed be unconstitutional. And if they try to do those things, we'll be back in court trying to prevent them. The thing that does worry me, right, is we look at the Congress, and the thing that does worry me is whether the Republicans are willing to take steps back on the filibuster. And I'm hopeful that that isn't the case, because one of the things that you could see is legislation legislation moving through Congress. And once it gets to the Senate, you have the protection of the filibuster. But once that goes away, should it go away, then I believe some very draconian things could occur at that time. And I don't think that that is healthy, a back and forth that we need to have in our democratic institutions right now. So that's the one thing that keeps me awake at night. The other, stuff, I feel very confident that we're prepared and ready for what's coming.
Okay, thank you. The next one's somewhat related about voting. I'll start with you, Jessica, and then if you have anything to add, Dan, you can. The question is, in states where people have to vote in person, how realistic is it to fear that ICE will appear at polling places to intimidate potential voters? And what can be done to prevent this? So we'll start with Jessica first.
Sure. So it's federal law that ICE is not allowed to be at polling locations. But even the small threat that has started to creep into the narrative is dangerous. Because ICE doesn't have to be at polling locations. They can be in communities nearby. And that is enough to provide a chilling effect and make people not want to leave their houses to go vote. So DHS has said that they won't send ICE to polling locations. Polling locations are protected, but it's a little bit bigger than that. And it's even the threat that ICE would be in a community around near a polling location is enough to make people think twice about leaving their homes in order to be able to go out and vote and to make their voices heard. So, I am impressed and excited to hear about the Attorney General talk about the coordination that's happening amongst different attorney generals across the country, and so that would be a great opportunity, I think, to maybe talk about how and if there are opportunities there to coordinate prevention around that issue around the country.
Well, and that's a great lead in for you. Dan, is there an Oregon perspective on ICE showing up at polling places?
I appreciate Jessica's comments. I mean, you have again, remember, you've got that federal law. The other thing, just to keep in mind too, is where we're trying to determine thunder or ice is thunder or ice. Goodness gracious. Thunder or lightning. Where are we? What's going on? And you thought it was late back east, Jessica. We're looking at this, right? You do have a president who recently said that ICE will not be at polling places. So that is, let's take the positive where we can get it. Does that mean that intimidation will not be attempted during an election? Obviously, we can't take that for granted. And those are things we need to be aware of. And we have strong laws preventing some of those things here in Oregon. And again, this is something that is top of mind, right? We want people, comfortably being able to cast their vote in Oregon. We're a vote by mail state. So we have a little bit of different, what I would say a little bit of a different look than many other states in the right now. So.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. Jalen, the next one is for you. If you could talk a little more about the voter intimidation that people in the tribal community face and how you address that. I could say it again. Can you talk more about the voter intimidation that people in the tribal community face and how you address that?
Well, I don't know if people categorize it as voter intimidation. I would say that I think there's a lot of barriers to getting people to vote and to understand, because when you think about some of the things that land on the ballots, the language that it is using is often hard for our people to understand in terms of, there's just words that we do not understand. And so then we're having to go through and explain them. And so it's extra education to help people to connect on how that impacts them. And I think the biggest piece to this is that really having to explain the connection between how something can impact us in our community. And I think that's a big one that people don't really understand, because we are under federal law. We aren't under state law. And so sometimes when there's something up on the ballot that is for the state, that doesn't often necessarily apply to us. And so sometimes people don't think that they need to vote in it. However, there are implications whether something passes or not. And so I think for me, that is where I would say, and then right now, just given with everything that's happening in the landscape of our country right now, I think when we're thinking of tribal identification, working on strengthening the understanding around tribal identification, that it is certified to be able to be used, and then just the threat in general to folks that come from our community who we've had folks in the country that have been detained who are tribal citizens. And so I think there's also just that in general of people wondering if it is going to be safe. And then all of that just combined with the trauma that we've experienced in this country over the long periods of time.
Thank you. Thank you. This next one is along the same lines, I think. I'll start with for Attorney General Rayfield, and Jessica, you may want to add in a little bit if you know. There were several issues and discrepancies in the Texas primary that made it more difficult for people to vote, and it had to be resolved in the courts for longer voting time last night. Are these types of issues, well, and so for Jessica, when it's your turn, if you could talk about some perspective you may have at the national level. But for Dan, are these types of issues being studied in Oregon to prevent voter disenfranchisement?
So I can't in some of the specifics with what went on in Texas. I wouldn't have the details on that specifically. What I can say is that the good news yesterday's turnout was actually very high by standards from what I can read. And again, I'm picking up things through the news. We'll be doing analysis of all of the different primary elections that are going on and monitoring that as kind of the dry run as we move towards a general election. All of these different types of timeline issues, voting, and also the ability to be able to cast your vote are all within the suite of things that we're looking at.
And Jessica, with your national viewpoint, what did you hear from Texas?
So I think this the problems that happened in Texas is a great call for all of us to remind our friends and neighbors what they need to do and where they need to go when they vote. I understand it to be a change in the polling locations and the separation of primary two parties. Primary voting and separating that between the two parties. But, Vote 411 is a great resource. We were up late into the night. Our Vote 411 team was making sure that we were providing up-to-date information for voters in those affected areas, making sure that if they came to vote for 111, they knew the information they needed and where they needed to go, but also, that they were able to go and make sure to stand in line for an extra 2 hours or to go to their polling location. So this is, I think, a great opportunity to talk about voter education and how we all need to make sure that we are talking to our neighbors about what the rule changes are, sharing information, and also, making sure that we have a national notification for when those changes do occur, so that folks are able to know where they need to go, what they need to bring with them, and what's on their ballot. And Vote for 111 is a great place to do that.
All right, thank you. And the next question is for you, Jalen. Can you tell? This is something. It's broader. It's how we can use what you've been talking about in the organization. Can you tell us more about how we can use your grassroots organization methods to empower the diverse and unrepresented people in our communities? Will those methods work in larger communities?
Yes and no. So we are actually getting ready as an organization to take our work that we've been doing on the Warm Springs Reservation and do some work in Deschutes County. Like we said, we are working on Deschutes County. And so that is a part of the tribal civic engagement learning community is they'll be able to then go get real experience in doing some work in Deschutes County. And so we're going to be pretty much kind of piloting what we've done in Warm Springs. We did do a lot of the that kind of work when we supported a couple of school board members in Redmond also. And so we've I think over time I think we will some of the tips would be as a grassroots organizer, I think finding champions who are, and I don't think this is really new information, finding the champions that are in the community. And I think right now, this day and age, and I've seen somebody comment in there, is also looking at who are the younger leaders coming up. Who are those younger people? Because then they can bring in those groups of people because like anybody, our peers, we are in relationship with our peers. And so the more we can bring in, I think, intergenerational leaders into the work to be able to bring the various groups. And that was one of the strategies we used with our community because we had 5 candidates. They all were from like diverse backgrounds, had relationships with various people across the reservation that we were able to hit more people by those relationships and using those relationships and focusing on those relationships. So we didn't have them go into an area where, like, let's say in Simnasho, that was my area because that's where I grew up. I knew the families, I knew the people, and we didn't have someone who lived in Siksiko, which is our southern area, go into our area because that doesn't make sense for us. And so we really focused on the relationships that the people had. And so I think really one of the biggest things is relationships, and so we keep talking about that is the relationship aspect of this. And so now we're starting to see that and develop those. And I think one of the things that we have to realize is that this is going to take time. As much as we want it to be right here and right now, it's going to take time. And so really building for the future. And I think in Native Way, we talk about building 7 generations out. And so we think long term. And so that's really what we're thinking. Of course, we want immediate results, right? But at the same time, we're also building for the future. And so I think that's one of the tactics. And I think we would be open to discussing this even further with folks that are interested and seeing where we can partner because we do have a lot more that we could say. Brian is the one that works on the electoral stuff. I'm the one that works in the community organizing and on the ground work. And so he's a lot more I guess, in tune with the election side of things, the electoral side, whereas I'm the community advocate, and I'm like an example of what I'm talking about. I was a community advocate for many years in education, and that's how I ended up running for school board and developing this field plan that aligned with my values and then aligned with our values as Native people. And so I would welcome anybody that wants to connect with us to please do. I know Brian has a lot more that he would say and add to that, but that's what I can answer in a short answer.
Yep. Thank you. And I think we will be looking at how we can connect people with you who are interested, who are listening in. So you may have seen the note that the Attorney General lost power and he's working on coming back. So stay tuned. We've got a question for you, Jessica. And it's related to the comment about younger people. How will you ensure that the League continues to grow with the next generation of voters who do not seem politically engaged? Does the League of Women Voters have resources to help university students register in their home precincts and states? 2 questions.
2 questions. Yes, absolutely. So first and foremost, the league is 100. Well, we know the league's 106 years old, but we wouldn't have gotten this far if we hadn't been able to attract new people every year, every cycle, every time around. We have a youth voter power initiative that we have been running for the last couple of years. We continue to engage new voters, young voters on the issues that they care about. And for a lot of folks, that's just about, becoming involved in the process. How do I get involved in the process? How do I work with my local league to do voter registration drives? I would always, when we do voter registration drives, I always defer to our local leagues on voter registration materials. You all are the experts. You know the communities the best. You know what where the best places to go are, whether that's the farmers market or the local library, or even I don't know. I saw locally go to a 5K race once and register some voters. So like I will always defer to our local experts on voter registration activities. But we do, of course, have our high school voter registration project and a really great guide to helping register high school voters, and that has grown and extended out to community college voters as well. So we have a bunch of different resources that are available on our website, and that we try to share with our state and local leagues across the country. Of course, we want to make sure that we're growing the voter database, or not database, but the voter base as well, and making sure that we're bringing folks into the process and as we're able and as they're eligible so we can have more informed voters for years to come.
Right. Thank you. Thank you. We're a university city in Portland. We have a lot of universities here, so those are resources will be checking out. Jalen, you talked about gerrymandering. And so can you talk a little bit more about the problems you're facing of gerrymandering in your county, in your nation, and what can be done about it? And have you ever used lawsuits as a method to fight back against gerrymandering?
We didn't file a lawsuit, but the last time, so for context, I worked on census in 2020 with my tribe, and then later on was brought on as a consultant for redistricting and did work across the state with Native tribes and Native leaders on redistricting to be able to get the Native nations involved in districting and then get tribal folks involved in testifying at the redistricting hearings and all different things. And me and Brian actually worked together on that, where we helped people put together we supported them in understanding the testimony process and how to put together a testimony. And then we gave them access to be able to provide those testimonies. And so through that, we also were gathering the input from all of the folks, and then Brian created a map that we did submit. And unfortunately, two of our tribal nations were gerrymandered, which was my tribe, the Confederate Tribes of Warm Springs, as well as the Klamath tribe. And for mine, what happened was we used to be and again, Brian is the one that's on the electoral side, but our district used to include Madras, which is in Jefferson County. And we have a lot of folks that live in Jefferson County. We have our students that go to Jefferson County. We have people that work in Jefferson County. And what they did was they drew the map right along the reservation boundary, and that's where it ends. And so now we are included, and I can't remember which House district it is, but we're included with now Wasco County, and so like Hood River and the Dalles. And for us, that was the cutting of what is the language where you cut community? Because we do have people that live and work and go to school in Madras. And so they cut two communities for us that were important to us. And so we were gerrymandered. We didn't file a lawsuit. I think it's one of those things where we're like, okay, we learned from that. Now, how do we make sure that this doesn't happen again? And so we're really looking at the next census and the next redistricting of how to support folks around the state to be able to hopefully get more people to get engaged and more people to get involved and join the efforts to ensure that this doesn't happen again. And so we really started meeting with tribal nations across our state as well to help them understand like what that meant. And we talked to folks down in Klamath also about how they were gerrymandered. And so really, I think, again, going back to, we have to do that education. And so doing the education to help, and then getting prepared for the next, I mean, when we came out of that, I was like, we have 8 years, but now we're at like, we have 4 years. It goes by so fast. And so now we're getting ready to prep and make sure that we are being proactive in our work and advocacy, so that we're not having to react to the results.
Wow, thank you. Yeah, I got it. It's a very, very excellent explanation. I think I've got one more question for Jessica and one for Dan if he's able to join in, and then we've got, I think that's what we can do. So Jessica, what is being done by the League to inform people of the new U.S. Postal Service regulations regarding postmarks affecting the date validity of ballots?
I love this question, and it's because I am a post office nerd in addition to being a legislation and voting rights nerd. My father is a retired postal employee. So thanks for this question. I think, the league had a lot of conversation and had some conversation with some folks at the post office when this first came out. And the post office has made it very clear that they haven't actually implemented anything new. The work that they have done has been to add a section to their domestic mail manual, to get fancy with it, to clearly define what a postmark is and how it's used. And so in that way, so that they can let people know what a postmark is, how it is used, and then, help develop some education materials for voters who are returning their ballots by mail, what they need to do to make sure that their ballot is marked and received and sent, and so that their election administrators can count it. So we have some frequently asked questions on FAQ that we have published for our league members. And we understand this to be a rule that was developed by the Board of Governors of the Postal Service and the Postal Service itself, and was free of influence by the administration. Again, just like I said earlier, this is an opportunity for us to help talk about what a postmark actually is, what it means for your ballot, and then to continue to encourage people to send their mail-in ballots back earlier than they think that they should, so that we can make sure that they're received by local election administrators and counted according to all of the rules that are in your state. So we have some FAQs that we could share with our members if you haven't seen those yet already. But again, I'm a postal nerd. I love the post office. But yeah, so we're doing some work to educate voters on what it actually means for them.
Okay, well, thank you, and thank you to your father for. I think we're all postal nerds, but it's just such a vital resource for our country, and great to have that information that you gave us, reassurance, and certainly something we'll be able to publicize here. So, Attorney General Rayfield, are you able to maybe not join us by video, but by audio?
Let's see if it works.
So far, so good. So I've got I think possibly the last question. And I have to say, it's a two-parter for you. The Brennan Center for Justice recommends for blue states to A, ban third parties from challenging a person's voter registration or right to vote. You've heard about that. And B, establish criminal and civil remedies for voter intimidation. Thoughts on this for Oregon?
Yeah, and we already have some intimidation laws already on the books here in Oregon. So that's just one of the baselines. Are they appropriate? Should we always be reviewing them to make sure that they are, relevant to the time we're living in? Absolutely. We should do that with all of our laws. And so that's one thing that as you're looking at this, there's one thing to have a law in the books. There's another thing to have a law in the books that is actually something you can enforce and use. And sometimes the way that they are written are not always I think with the best aim towards actually having a fair balanced conversation about how do you actually pursue and what is intimidation under a given set of circumstances. So with respect to the third party being able to challenge voters, that's something that I have read about personally, and I have not heard all the different sides. I will tell you, generally, I align with the Brennan Center on a lot of their electoral reforms. But one thing, having been a prior legislator, the always thing that I always want is like having an open policy conversation. In this new role that I'm in, where I'm outside of the legislature, I have been less weighing in on the laws that the legislature is, thinking about or considering, and more looking about how we actually administer and the accountability side of the fence. So, but again, what I would tell you on the whole, I have a very soft spot for the Brennan Center and the work that they do in the United States.
And they're clearly looking at these issues quite seriously and for the whole country. So we have just a minute left. I want to ask each of our panelists to say some last words. We're about empowering voters and defending democracy. And so I'll tag to Jessica to any last words for us real quickly for her.
Yeah, just real quickly, I'll just throw another league, I think, tagline out there. Democracy is not a spectator sport. It's up to all of us to get involved, to stand up, to raise our voices and use our votes if we want to make sure that we have a democracy for years, decades, and days to come.
Very good. How about you, Dan Rayfield?
I would add on to what Jessica said, but maybe from a different lens. When we continue to participate and be involved, I think that is where we really start seeing the activity and change start to occur. And whether that is peaceful protests, whether that's being active in the legislature, whether that's being here at groups like this, but there is an ebb and flow that all of us have seen. And it's generally, we see them after elections. And it's after something has gone wrong, or we have an election where we start seeing some really rough things, we see this massive ebb or into what I would say, or the flow into this space where we have this energy, these people coming, and we're all participating and being a part of something. Once we get past the next election cycle, people take a deep breath and the energy goes away, and the meetings are less attended than they once were. And so for me, I think there is this responsibility, which is tough to have because we all have other things that we're engaged in this world. We're busy folks. We have family. We have other volunteer endeavors. But how do you maintain that same level of energy and build that energy in the times you desperately need it, like now? But how do you maintain it when you don't have that, when you don't think you need it in the moment, where it's not imminent? Because I think it is in those middle periods of time and that where we're not engaging with each other as often as maybe we probably should, that lead to some of these peaks and valleys that we have right now. And I've seen this in a lot of different community meetings throughout the years.
Oh, thank you. It's certainly food for thought for us. And Jalen, one last thought that you might have to leave us with.
Yeah, I just want to, I guess, finish off with just letting people, again, I guess, challenging people to think about how tribal nations can be a partner and in relationship when we're thinking of our democracy and the health of our nation. And I think one thing that I just want to let people know, that tribal consultation doesn't have to happen at the government to government level. It can be all the way down to the local level where we are consulting with groups, with organizations, with businesses. It can happen everywhere. And I just want people to start asking, where are the tribal nations, especially if you have one in and around your area where you're doing your advocacy work. Please consider asking those questions and bringing us into those rooms. Thank you.
Well said and taken. So, well, that's it. and I want to thank you. Before I turn this back to our president, Audrey, I want to thank our league board member and coordinator for our community education forums, Melanie Billings-Yoon, for this forum in particular and for overseeing the chat questions. I want to give a big thank you to our esteemed panelists for joining us tonight and for all that you're doing. And now I'm going to turn the microphone over to our league president, Audrey Zunkel DeCourcy.
Well, thank you, Linda, and thank you to all of our panelists for your insightful remarks. I think we're all leaving this panel feeling a little more hopeful and empowered, which is exactly what we want tonight. We also really appreciate all the audience questions. So many thoughtful questions coming in. We couldn't get to all of them, of course, but hopes that we had great conversation here. I want to say a special thanks to our sister leagues for joining us from across the state. Those 38 people gathered in Union County watching this, we see you. Thank you for being here with us. Thanks to all of you in the audience tonight. And for all of you listening in the podcast or watching the video in the coming weeks. We want to give special thanks to our Community Education Committee under Melanie Billings-Yoon and to our host, Linda Jackson, for bringing this webinar to you. Thank you so much. Thanks to Metro East for recording this for later viewing. We invite you to tell your friends, colleagues, family, send it out on social media that we'll have the video and the podcast of this program available by next week on our website, LWVPDX.org. And when we post the recording, we will also post some follow-up links to the resources you've been hearing about, mentioned by the speakers, contacts. So check the website next week for the recording. Funding for this program is provided by donations to the Portland League and from the Carol and Velma Sailing Foundation. The League of Women Voters is a membership organization. So we thank our members for your generous volunteer and financial support for our educational programs. And if you are not yet a member, we invite you to join the League. Membership and donor information is at our website, lwvpdx.org. Well, there's a few upcoming events that we want to invite you to. Members can hear from U.S. diplomat Joe Yun about U.S. foreign policy at an interest group meeting on March 24th. The next No Kings protest is coming up on March 28th, and League members will be marching. Please come join us. And then on April 8th, we'll hold our next community education panel, continuing our conversation about defending democracy under the League's theme, Unite and Rise, with a special look at local organizing. We hope to see you there. See our website for more information. Now, thanks again to our vigorous defenders of democracy, our three wonderful panelists, and to you for listening in. Have a great evening, everyone. Thank you.